But until I was 19 or 20, I was straight edge. So like the X's on the wrists, like no drinking at all. I didn't drink a whit at all.
Hey all, Amanda here, and welcome to entry 65 of Great Beer Adventure. Welcome back to our long shows. It has certainly been a while. I hope your summer has turned into a fabulous fall and you are out hunting down fall craft beers. Today I have an amazing guest who we have actually talked about before on this show, Josh Christie. If you have read a book about Maine beer history, it just might have been his. On to the interview. Hey everybody, I am sitting at the table today with Josh Christie. Welcome to the table, thank you.
Thank you.
We are outside of Navarre. It is in August. We are listening to this in September, so think warm midsummer thought.
Hot midsummer thoughts.
It's quite nice outside this evening. My husband actually thinks that I was born in the wrong climate because I'm like, it's a little chilly right now. It's not even a little bit chilly. But I've got a stout with me. I mean, I'm like, it's starting to cool down a bit. I should get a
stout weather, and it's mid-August.
Yeah, early to mid-August. So it's stout weather. I mean, this is my time. We are at Navarre, and it is a little bit loud over here because people are enjoying the summertime weather while it lasts. The countdown to fall is upon us. So many of my parenting friends out in other parts of the country are like, first day of school.
Jeez.
We've got it really good here. The kids don't start until after Labor Day.
Unless you're in Aroostook County.
Right. But then you get 2 weeks off in the middle of
potato harvest, that's right.
Yeah. And if you don't have to potato harvest, that's cool.
It's just 2 weeks off. Yeah.
Right. But if you do, it's kind of crazy. So, I used to Google people, but I've stopped that. I know a little bit about you, but I would love for you to tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Josh Christie. I'm a beer writer here in Portland. I started my career writing about beer, as a lot of people did, as a blogger. I started a website called Brews and Books, which was about books and beer, which were kind of my two passions. And then kind of got confident enough after writing consistently for years and years to start doing freelance pitching, sold a couple pieces to small papers, got picked up for ratebeer.com for a brief period of time, had an editorial side. They wanted to launch a network of bloggers, so I was part of that. Carla Companion, the beer babe, was actually part of it as well, writing about New Hampshire. And that got my name out there a little bit more, and that eventually got shuttered by Rate Beer, but because my name was out there, the publisher of my book, The History Press, approached me and asked if I wanted to do anything about the history of beer in Maine. Most of my pieces for Rate Beer had been kind of brewery profiles, that kind of thing, so the history of specific breweries, and the History Press approached me and asked me if I wanted to turn that into an actual full-length book, comprehensive about the history of Maine. So I wrote that in 2012, and it was published in 2013. Since then, I wrote a book called The Handbook of Porters and Stouts. I co-wrote that with Chad Polwins, not a Maine-specific book, but about stouts and porters all around the world. And now still do a little bit of writing, hopefully looking at a second edition or a sequel of the Maine Beer Book, because in 2013, when it was published, there were 40-some breweries in the state of Maine, and now we're over 80, amazingly, depending on some counting. So that's the writing side of things in terms of beer. I write for the Portland Press Herald about the outdoors in Maine as well, hiking during the summer, skiing during the winter, and my day job, apart from all of this, is I own a soon to be opened when this comes out in September, independent bookstore on the east end of Portland called Print. We're aiming for an October opening, so that's the day job and keeps me very much in the world of books and writing.
Very much so. I think you couldn't get any more into the world of books.
Yeah, it'd be tough.
Yeah. So So a couple questions. One a comment. Carla has always had the coolest names. Carla Companion, and then Carla Lauder, like a Lauderton.
I mean, I think she got married just so she could have Lauderton in her name, but maybe.
Yeah.
It's a good reason. It's a good reason as any. So.
As she's going through the checklist, she's like, well, this is a plus.
Right, exactly. It's on the yes side of the the chart.
And then, so porters and stouts today, we're going to just kind of move into round one as we're talking about this, because I actually am drinking a stout. It is by Foulmouth, a new brewery in South Portland. They opened...
One of many new breweries in Maine.
One of many. They opened this year. It was in June?
Sounds right.
Early July, sometime around there. There's so many that it's hard to keep the exact opening dates of all of these breweries like in your mind.
If you can keep the opening day of every brewery in Maine in your mind, I think Sean would have to hire you to work for the Brewers Guild.
Yeah, you would just be like the Trivial Pursuit of Maine brewers. And so I'm drinking the coconut cream stout, and I don't get a lot of coconut flavor out of it, but it's really good and creamy and delicious. But my question is, so I've Googled this many times, you've written a whole book about it, so what is the definitive answer, the difference between porters and stouts?
The definitive answers are kind of, it depends who you ask, and there isn't really one, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, if you look at beer competitions, if you look at the judging standards, stouts tend to be a little bit darker. A porter kind of exists somewhere between like a bitter and a stout in terms of color, in terms of flavor, where a stout would be more defined as the darker thing, the more roasted bitter thing. I tend to think porters have more of that kind of earthy flavor than just the roasted malt flavor that a stout has. But again, you'd ask 5 beer writers and get 6 different answers probably on what the difference is.
There's some beers that I've had that say they're a porter, and I'm like, there's no way, this is such a stout. And then there are other stouts that seem a little bit less dark, a little bit, the mouthfeel isn't as creamy. I'm like, hey, it's a porter.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Basically, it's, whatever the brewery decides it is, that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And so when people ask me, they're like, you do this beer podcast, right? I have no idea.
Well, I think about the fact, it's practically a joke now, that IPA is so popular and so all-encompassing. What used to be called a pale ale breweries will now call a session IPA. Yeah. And I feel like someday either stout or porter will be really popular, and then everything will be a stout or everything will be a porter.
That makes sense, yeah. It's all about branding.
Exactly, yeah.
And what are you drinking?
I am drinking the Night Shift Whirlpool, which is an American pale ale. It is that nice kind of New England juicy tropical hop flavors. It's got that New England haze to it as well. I cannot see through the beer looking across the table here at Amanda.
No seeing through that beer.
I am not quite as towards the chilly mood as Amanda yet, so I am enjoying a low alcohol 4% light pale ale.
Yeah, I've got jeans on, looking for my wrap. I'm turning into a little old lady. I'll be 35 until probably right around when this comes out, but I am ready to be a little old lady already. So, where can you tell us Night Shift? Night Shift, that's out of Mass, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I think so too. They've got going back to those darker beers, they've got a coffee something.
Yeah, the
Wake
coffee porter, if I'm not mistaken. But it was, I think, the first thing I had from them, which is really good. Like, that is a cold brew tasting. Like, that is a coffee-ass coffee beer. It's not just a hint of coffee or anything like that.
That is good. And I really like the Rising Tides coffee, the Wake Point.
Yes.
They call it. Yeah. That one, you put that over some ice and you just like sip it on it and you're like, this is cold brew.
Yep.
That's all it is.
Exactly. Yep.
So delicious. All right, so we are drinking beers. We will be drinking beer, but let's get to the reason that I invited you specifically to the table today. So you had mentioned that you wrote the book, The History in Maine history. How does it go? I have it on my Kindle.
Maine Beer, Brewing, and Vacationland.
That is a lot of words. Did you name it? That's
a good question. I don't think I did. just kind of collaboratively. The publisher, the History Press, does these regional histories all around the country. Some of them are those kind of sepia tone ones you would have seen at a gift shop or a bookstore. That's all the old photos, but they have some more text-focused, much wordier books like this one, and they launched a line called American Palate a couple years ago, which was specifically regional food histories. And I know that a bunch of them were Colorado beer and New Hampshire beer and stuff like that.
Like
so
Santa Fe or a Texas.
Yeah. So I suspect that it's just kind of the house name, and then I'm pretty sure I came up with Brewing and Vacationland to put the Maine spin on it.
Yeah,
but.
And they're like, all right, you can have it.
Sure, yeah.
So the thing that really gets me, and that I get so geeky about the stuff behind the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want to know about. It's really why I do a podcast. People let you in when you come up with a microphone and you're like, hi, I want to know why you do this and how it all works. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Nathan Sanborn sat down and talked to me about water for an hour.
Yeah.
Because I had a microphone. And I was so excited. So they call you up and they ask you if you're going to do this.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah.
Yeah.
What happened?
So it's a little different than if you think about the publishing industry. Like, often you will have a manuscript already, or you'll have a pitch ready, and you'll take it to a publisher. And there's an editorial process of kind of crafting it into the book it becomes, but you come with something that's already fairly fully formed. This, I was lucky enough, to talk about a job that kind of fell into my lap. Not that I didn't work for it, because I'd been writing about beer professionally for years, but they just said, you're writing about Maine beer a lot. Do you want to write a book about it? And then you get the contract and you sign it, and it lays out the stuff that is too boring for me to talk about here about like what your royalties are and how the split is, the print runs, stuff like that, but also includes like what they need for the manuscript, which is, I think, 35,000 words for mine was about what it was. It's about a 160, 180 page book, somewhere around there.
That's like the worst homework assignment ever.
Yeah, as someone that had was aiming blogging for between like 600 and 1,000 words, and for the Press Herald I write about 800 words every time. Like, seeing such a huge number was just kind of, I looked at the contract and I signed it, and then I was just kind of boggling over like, how do you write that many words about this one topic? And that was how I kind of settled on the structure for the book. I talked with my editor about what they wanted the book to be. They had sent me some other books they've done about beer to say, this is what people have done in the past, which were more straightforward narrative, like start in this year when brewing started in the state and come forward to today, and this is the story of it. And I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to do profiles of all the breweries in the state, which was very convenient in terms of thinking about that word count, because you take 35,000 words and you divide it by the 35 breweries in the state, and you're like, oh, it's 35,000 word pieces instead of one big thing, which maybe this just sounds crazy, but to me that made it this approachable thing all of a sudden that you could put on a checklist and just check off the breweries as you wrote about them. Exactly. Yeah. So settled on the structure, which I figured the first chunk of the book would be the history of brewing in Maine, meaning like pre-Prohibition, earliest colonial settlers here, kind of a short narrative thing about what happened in Maine in terms of Prohibition, because Maine had Prohibition 100 years before the rest of the country did. And then from there, just tracking down the names of all the breweries in the state, which is fairly easy, but not as easy as it is now. And then starting to research and write.
Yeah. So, way back on episode 3, and actually my very first episode that I've ever recorded, we just released it as episode 3, we talk about the history of Maine beer. And that's what, and I said I had your book on the Kindle, and that's when I bought it. I bought it then because I wanted to know more about beer in Maine. And I actually... So as a mom, I was a teacher at the time, I was doing all this stuff, so I had Siri read it to me. She does not know how to say a lot of the words in your book, like jalapenos. She cannot say it. It's jalap.
I would imagine.
Jalapenos. I don't know how.
I would imagine Kennebec is probably a tough one too. A lot of the main place names.
Yeah.
Stebbins, Pugsley, La Charity.
Yeah, I had to really sit there every once in a while and be like, what is she doing?
but I did get through it. I did understand it. The part I was really intrigued by was that pre-prohibition stuff and how crazy it was here in Maine. I mean, it kind of feels like we're starting to roll back around there with like the per capita beer available.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about? I don't know if you can hear that, but there's some crazy noise going on. Can you tell me a little bit more about like what you went through to get that information and kind of what you found?
Sure, yeah. In terms of the research, Maine has incredibly great state archives with old newspapers and Maine state history, specifically the library up at UMO and then the Maine State Library have really great records. So I kind of started there. A lot of them are indexed by topic, so I could search for beer and brewing and prohibition and see if anything could come up. And then there's some really good books that talk about prohibition and alcohol consumption in general in New England, because those were really the only states at the very earliest days of the Republic, you know. So a lot of the books that talk about early alcohol history and prohibition include Maine or can be extrapolated out to Maine. So Ken Burns did a documentary called Prohibition a couple years ago. That was a great resource. Daniel Okrent wrote a book called Last Call, which is probably the best book written about prohibition in the United States. And a lot of that applied to Maine as well. So that was a starting point. And then just the super geeky thing I learned when I was a poli-sci major in college was you start with these kind of commercial works. Then you look at the primary sources they were looking at in the bibliography. You look at the papers they were pulling this information from. And if they have one line about Maine and you look up the reference, there might be a whole paper or a whole book about that topic in the state of Maine. So you just work your way backwards from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does like UMO and all these other places just kind of let you come in?
Yeah. You set up an appointment with usually the librarian or the archivist, and it depends on where you are. Like I know the Bowdoin archives, like there's some stuff they have there that you can't really touch, you know, because it's hundreds of years old and it's falling apart. So they'll make copies of it and bring you the copies or something like that. Some of it can't leave the library, so you have to look at it there. A lot of newspapers have been archived online, so that was a little, or on microfilm, like at the Portland Public Library. So you can look those up and figure it out that way.
Did you have to ever wear those like gloves?
I never had to wear the gloves. I kind of wish I did. Yeah, that seems like such a bona fide. Yeah.
How long did it take for you to say they gave you the contract?
Yeah.
And before you could start even writing, like how much research did you do?
I think it was a fairly short turnaround in terms of writing the book. I signed the contract in January of 2012 and the manuscript was due at the end of the year. So, yeah, so it was, I kind of hit the ground running with that. And once I had settled on the format of the book, I knew that I had written about the histories of some of the breweries in the state for Rate Beer, and I'd retained the rights to those pieces, so I knew I could go back and repurpose those, expand those. So I started filling those in, and then started writing a very rough outline of, so here's the timeline of what happened with beer in Maine. In the early 1800s, Maine was considered the drunkest place in the country. In 1851, there was a prohibition law passed, so there was no beer at all in the state of Maine, at least legally. It was the first state in the country to do it. There was national prohibition in the 1920s, and then I knew that Geary's had started it in the mid-80s. So starting with that broad outline, started looking at how I could fill that in.
Yeah. Now, I feel like at some point I've heard that the last brewery to leave was in South Portland. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of brothers, the McGlinchey brothers, some Irish immigrants that had moved into Maine that started brewing actually during Prohibition in Maine. Because they said, I thought this was a genius bit of con artistry. They said that, we're brewing it here. It's meant to be sold outside of the state. So we brew it here and then it's all exported and sold in Massachusetts or wherever. Alcohol could also be prescribed to invalids, could be prescribed as medicine, which is one way that people got around Prohibition. So I think it was prescribed in the state as well.
We call those green cards now. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We call them green. Is that what they're called now?
I know the cards you're talking about. I think we all do. Yeah.
I don't really know exactly what you're talking about, but I feel like that's correct.
Yeah. So they had a couple breweries, actually. One up kind of across the street from the Portland Company building is on the East End, and another one in South Portland. And they were the last two operating, I think, in Maine, certainly in the Portland area.
It's just so crazy to me to think about it. I always feel like I have to apologize to the rest of the country for, like, prohibition. Like, because...
It started here, yeah.
Right. And I'm like, yeah, they're called the Maine laws.
Yeah.
Like, it's so devastating to me. I feel like that's why right now we're really pushing hard to, like, give back. Like, here you go.
Yeah.
Try our cloudy IPA.
Yeah.
Delicious.
Yeah, it's a good, we've been paying for it for years, so.
Yeah, eventually I think that, it would just be like, it's over. It's good. We've made our amends. How many breweries do we open here?
I think, was it this year or last year, we passed the number of breweries that are open in the U.S., like pre-prohibition? I think we finally did, so that might be the...
That's it?
Maybe we can say, wash our hands of it, yeah.
We've made up for it now.
Yep.
All is forgiven, whether you agree or not. We have decided.
Precisely, yeah.
So what was one of the most interesting stories that you came across about, the breweries that are open here in Maine?
I mean, my favorite stories, and it's someone that... So I was born in 85, so I started drinking in the mid-2000s when there was already kind of a burgeoning brewing scene here in Maine. Not nearly as many breweries as are now, but still dozens at that time, which is better than a lot of places in the country. And I didn't really appreciate two brewers in particular, Geary's and Allagash, thinking about how hard it was for them launching their breweries. It's always a hard time to start a business, and you've got your own beer and you're putting it out there, but Geary's Ale starting to sell in 1986, like, it was more expensive than anything else on draft, and there was nothing else that looked like it. You were looking mostly at, like, lagers, and then you see this copper-colored beer that was coming out, and you really have to sell it, I would imagine, pint by pint, just to every customer you can talk to and say, this is locally made, I know that it looks different, I know that it tastes different, I know that it's more expensive, but it's really worth it to invest in this. And then the same deal 10 years later when Allagash launched with Allagash White, which, talk about a beer that looked and tasted different than anything. This was before the days of Blue Moon. This was before there was a nationally distributed wit beer. Just wouldn't have seen anything like that. So thinking about how hard it was to sell those, really, though I think Allagash does, I think Geary's doesn't necessarily get enough credit now for all the pioneering work that David and Alan Pugsley and Ed Stebbins and all the people that were at that brewery at the start did to establish it.
Yeah, I feel like the brewing industry has definitely changed since post-prohibition. You've got the older breweries, and now you've got some of the, like, middle-aged breweries, and then you've got, like, the newer breweries. And some of those middle-aged breweries are trying to, like, change things up and try to be a little younger and hipper. And I feel like some of the older breweries, they don't necessarily get as much, I don't know what the right word is, acknowledgement of...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you don't care about the history, you just think, it's a weird thing to think about the brewing industry in Maine, that there are beers that have been around long enough that people think of them as like, oh, that's the beer my father drank, It's not for me. It's the same way that 15, 20 years ago, people thought about, like, Miller and Coors, like, that was what my dad drank. I want this local beer. And then you see something like Geary's or Shipyard or Gritty's, it's an institution, and tastes different because they're English style rather than the kind of American styles that are being brewed now, and people just aren't taking to it as much.
Yeah. But there is we recently had a little mini episode with Josh Bernstein, and he just talked about his first beer memory, and he was saying that there's, he was talking about the magic of Busch.
Yeah.
And he's just saying how, like, there's a time and a place for everything. And I think there definitely is still a time and place for these older breweries. There's, so much nostalgia around them. And, you really do have to say thank you to these breweries, because otherwise we'd be drinking really crappy beer.
It's true. It's true. Really? And I think about the fact that, like, and I love... With rare exception, like, I love all the brewers and all the breweries in Maine, but like with food, with a hamburger or like fish and chips or something, like give me gritties. Like that English style pub beer is just perfect with pub food. They nailed it in 1988 and they've still got it down. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other beer that I might have a pint of after dinner or something like that. But like with food, it's hard to beat some of that English style beer.
I can't remember. I think it's Gary's Summer. Eat it with Cool Ranch
Doritos.
It tastes just like a Belgian. I think it's the Gary's Summer. It's either Gary's or Gritty's, but I can't remember. But it was a while ago.
I'll get all of them and do a panel and taste them out. Yeah.
We could get a bunch of bags of Doritos and a bunch of summer beer. We could just try them all.
Yeah.
Although we're gonna have to wait till next summer because this summer is it's already really cold.
Right.
So we gotta wait
exactly. Yeah.
July 4th. I can do it next July 4th. Well, we're talking a lot about beer here in Maine and where it's come from. But let's talk a little bit about your history for a moment.
Sure.
We're on to round 3, and with round 3, we ask what your first beer memory is.
Sure. So my first beer memory, this seems weird coming from someone that makes their living now writing about and talking about and drinking beer. But until I was 19 or 20, I was straight edge. So like the X's on the wrists, like no drinking at all. I didn't drink a whit at all. But my wife, but at that time my girlfriend and I ended up taking a trip to Berlin to visit her family who's still in Germany. Some of her extended family's still there. And I had, to be frank, kind of started wavering a little bit on the straight edge thing, although I didn't really drink yet. And on the plane over, I wasn't 21 yet, but I was old enough in Europe to drink, so I could get a drink on the plane if I wanted to. And they had probably a couple beers, and I know they had Heineken, which I had never had before because I never had anything before. Don't particularly like Heineken now. I was like, well, it's a German beer, and I'm headed to Germany, so why not get it? So I had it on the plane over, and remember thinking, like, this is all right. And then once I got to Germany, had like Schneider Aventinus, which is one of my favorite beers in the world, and a bunch of other German beers, and really came back as a fairly serious beer drinker. But going over there, without that Heineken, I wouldn't be a beer drinker now. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So I guess until I was pretty old into my teenage years, I was straight edge, not by choice.
Mm-hmm.
It was just called strict parents.
Right.
So what is the X on the wrist?
It represents not. Yeah.
So you're pretty I don't understand. So were you hard edge but straight edge at the same time?
Well, straight edge refers to a scene in punk music.
Okay.
That the ethos of the scene, like reacting to the drugs and sex and drinking in punk, said, no, we're hardcore punks, but we don't do these things. And it was the music I was really into, and also had not strict parents, but not terribly permissive parents either. So it's like, well, I already like the music anyway. So.
Did you paint your nails?
No, never that. No, none of that.
I'm trying to picture 18-year-old Josh.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really, not really on brand with me now.
It's not. So I was trying to.
But neither was beer drinking. So.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we have come to our fourth and final round, and we're trying something new. And this last round is kind of a game of sorts. Not really a game. It's 2 questions. You ask me, and I ask you.
Yeah.
But it's completely random. I have to make up some new cards because one night I was like, I'm going to just do this. And I just went to the internet and grabbed a bunch of questions and wrote them on index cards.
So I'm looking at 6 cards.
Yep, and you're just going to grab one.
All right.
It's long enough ago that I really don't remember what is on them. So, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
So what makes you laugh most, Amanda?
I think it's probably the cheesy goofiness. My husband, he can be so silly sometimes. And that really makes me laugh. And then my kids also can be. We actually just went to Funtown, and we got off the teacups, and my cheeks hurt so bad. I mean, my husband was just being silly. He let the momentum squish himself up to our 5-year-old, because we just went, the 3 of us, the 5-year-old. We have a 2-year-old as well, but she's staying with grandma, so we could all go on the ride together. And he let the momentum squish her, and then she just thought it was so funny, and she let the momentum take her and bob her head around, and it was just so much fun being there without it. My cheeks still actually hurt because I just couldn't stop smiling and laughing. And yeah, I'm pretty sure the high school ride attendant that was there was like, there is something seriously wrong with that lady.
Well, that is the most charming answer you could possibly give them.
Well, thanks. I don't even know. It just is the truth. Okay, so for you, what is your proudest childhood accomplishment?
My proudest childhood accomplishment is that in primary school, so kindergarten through 6th grade, I was going to say I won, but I was on the winning team of the 3-legged race every single year on field day.
Wow.
7 years in a row, yeah.
Did you have the same partner or a different partner?
No, it was whoever was my best friend at the time, which makes
you
sense.
Have 7 different partners?
I don't think it was 7.
Each day, new best friend time.
Yeah, well, you remember grade school, right?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, my daughter's in preschool. She's getting ready to go. By the time this comes out, she'll be in kindergarten. I was cried like a million years. But yeah, she comes home and she's like, oh, my best friend, blah, blah, blah. And then the next day will be a completely different name. And you're like, except for this one friend. She does have this one friend that somehow she got nicknamed Money. And which made it really confusing the first few times that she actually came home. She's like, I really like money. And we're like, we do too.
You raised a capitalist, yeah.
Exactly. And Money's a storyteller. She tried telling my daughter that butterflies sting. And we got in a big argument this weekend over whether or not butterflies.
Yeah, why would you listen to Mom when Money's telling you that?
No, exactly. So, other than Money, the rest of the gang changes. But Money, she's really good at those facts.
Well, I feel like when you're a kid, it's you like the color blue, I like the color blue. We're best friends now.
Yeah.
It's so much easier.
Yeah. Or if you kind of, are stuck, we have a friend, so my kids are really close with their kids. But it's definitely, they have to be, whether or not they actually like each other. And they start melding into each other. My daughter never liked purple until Sophie came around, and she loved purple. And now we have to have purple everywhere. So yeah, kids. Well, thank you so very much for sitting down and talking to me. Let's make sure people know, where can they find information about your new bookstore?
So the bookstore is called Print. It's on the east end of Portland, and printbookstore.com is where all the information is about the store. So. And
any other Twitter, Facebook, anything that you want to...
I'll mention that if you go to brewsandbooks.com, which is my website, you can look at and buy all 4 of my books there, and also Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all my social media stuff is there as well. I'm J. Christie on pretty much everything.
Alrighty. So. I think that's actually, I was blogging way back in the day, and I think I found you at one point, and I felt like you kind of disappeared a little bit. It was they started dwindling, but it must have been during the time you were starting to...
Probably. So it's 35,000 words. Yeah. It was.
I'm not writing there with that blog anymore.
There is a weird... This will probably make me sound terrible, but at a certain point when you're writing and you're getting paid for it, it's like the writing that I was doing for free, I can put that aside as I'm getting, contracts to do stuff.
I think it makes perfect sense. As a podcaster, I'm now doing some stuff, and it's not that I don't love this, but it's I need to provide.
Yeah.
So it's what's the percentage of hours that go into each thing that I'm doing?
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, that's where we're at. We have a great editor now because...
That's great.
That has to happen. Shout out to Team Podcast. Thank you so much, very much, for meeting me on this kind of chilly August night. When it's like, what, 80?
Yeah, it's dipped to 79, so it's just freezing now.
So cold. Well, cheers to you.
Cheers to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Josh Christie for sitting down with me on a chilly 80-degree night and chatting books and beer. Make sure you head over to the show notes, greatbeeradventure.com/065 for links to all things Josh. Also, I challenge you to cuddle up with a nice beer and a good beer book this weekend. Tag us on Instagram at Great Beer Adventure so I can get some book inspiration. If you all, our fabulous co-adventurers, would like to support the show, check out our Patreon page. For less than the cost of a beer, you can show us some love. Go to greatbeeradventure.com/support. If you want to see even more from our adventures, follow us on Instagram at Great Beer Adventure. And be sure to subscribe to the show. That way, you won't miss a thing. Great Beer Adventure is part of the Great Pint Society. Cheers.